Hi, everybody. Welcome to History Respawn. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker, and today we're going to be covering MLB The Show 19. And my guest on today's show is Dr. John Harney. John, how are you doing?
I am good, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing great. So
Good.
we are doing this episode because we both love baseball, and it is currently October, which is the baseball postseason, and also, probably most importantly, my colleague John Harney has got a new book out, which is about the history of baseball. John, can you tell us a
It
little bit about
is.
that book?
Sure. It is called Empire of Infields, and it's all about Taiwanese baseball. And it's actually about how the role the Japanese Empire, the Empire of Japan, I should say, played in the spread of baseball to the island of Taiwan, which is a small island off the coast of China, which was a Japanese colony from 1895 to 1945. And so it's all about that, and it goes a couple of decades after the end of World War II, and it talks about, the way that baseball effectively helped to create a kind of a shared imperial culture between Japan and Taiwan. And a lot of Little League baseball in that game. Youth baseball is a big part of the story. So nothing in my book is directly relevant to this particular game. So hopefully MLB 20, if MLB 20 has either the Japan League and or the Little League World Series, that we could do a sequel next year.
Yeah,
I would be totally down for Little League World Series mode in
I would
MLB The
too.
Show.
I love the
That'd be
Little League
awesome.
World Series. As a former Little
Yeah,
Leaguer, I mean, it's amazing what's happened to the Little League. Now it's on television and everything. It's
I
incredible.
know. It's crazy. Yeah,
Um,
I shared a little story. One of my favorite little stories from the book. I barely mentioned the book, but it's an interesting story because Taiwan won, like, I'm forgetting now because the book is in front of me, like 12 out of 14 years or something in the 70s and early 80s. It
oh,
was this huge deal, and you'd have these Taiwanese fans would go and they would hold up banners protesting against the government because at that particular time, Taiwan wasn't a democratic country like it is today. And Chiang Kai-shek, who was the ruler of Taiwan, hired local thugs basically to go and pose as super uber pro China nationalists, and they got into a fight on the field
oh my gosh.
in one of the years in the 70s, and the New York Times and the Washington Post covered it with much bemusement and horror at grown men fighting each other over political protests as these little leaguers are kind of standing there watching them.
Ugh, disgusting. Well, nothing that
That
crazy.
more in Empire of Infields.
Nothing like that we'll see today in MLB The Show. But do check out John's book. And I thought we would go through MLB The Show because it is the only baseball game in town, basically. This is the lone baseball game, video game that's out that has the actual players, the actual teams, the licenses, if you will. And it is only on the PlayStation 4, as it has been for a couple decades now, MLB The Show. And I don't know about your experience with the show, John, but I used to play it on the PlayStation 3 in the early 2010s. And I am been kind of impressed with the new modes that are available in this updated version of the game. And in particular, for history fans, they have added in the past couple of years a whole section of historical moments in which you can relive famous events, famous games, famous careers of Major League past, and in particular in these storyline modes where you can go through kind of career highlights for some of the game's best players, best teams. So, John, what's your experience with MLB The Show, and what do you make of these new game modes?
It's quite similar. I played a bit in the early 2010s as well, and I remember at that particular time in the early 2010s, the big innovation in sports games was these career modes you could take that were way more in depth than the ones that had been there a few years earlier. And I joke with students I had to give up because I just became ludicrously obsessed with getting my ERA down to crazy low levels and things like that. And I just wasn't even enjoying it anymore. So, but yeah, so that was the show on the PS3 as well. I love these new modes, and I think the moments mode. Um, baseball is so self-conscious when it comes to its history,
Yeah.
and I think that these new moments will celebrate that in a really cool way. Like just now, you were scanning through the relive the career storyline thing, and they have the little baseball cards in the corner.
Yeah.
And that it's a little touch. I know it's kind of an obvious touch. You say, well, what else are they going to do? Yeah, but still, it's That's a cool, like that Babe Ruth picture is so great, you know.
Yeah.
It's just fantastic, you know.
Yeah.
It's well done. That was so well chosen, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a cool idea because, as you say, you know, Major League Baseball is so intensely connected to its history. They really play up the longevity of baseball. Baseball as a sport really kind of relies on history for its own self-importance, for its own kind of propaganda, if you will.
Right.
And then also with the kind of what we might call the analytical term, in baseball, there's a huge emphasis on career numbers and the statistics of baseball, which have a great deal of meaning in the game today, partly because they can kind of predict future player outcomes, but also because the statistics can be relied on because there's so many statistics. You know, they've essentially been playing the same game for almost 200 years now. And so that means that we have records of player performance going back 200 years, which means that we can, or at least GMs, general managers today, can use that kind of statistics to, you know, adjust current player, you know, performance, current teams, and scouting for new players. So history is integral to baseball and the understanding of baseball, even in a modern setting.
I think it's such a huge strength that baseball has, because you can't take soccer, for example. It's enormously challenging to compare Lionel Messi to Bobby Charlton or someone like that.
Perhaps one of the most iconic
who played in the
moments of
1960s.
his career didn't come until 1932.
Because the game has changed and people are running around, and sports science has affected it in ways that baseball, I think, credibly, you could argue, hasn't changed as much. This is fantastic presentation here again.
So this is one of the more famous moments in the history of American baseball. Babe Ruth, originally from Baltimore, Maryland, was a pitcher, came up as a pitcher with the Boston Red Sox in the early 19-teens, and then went on in the 1920s, 1930s to become kind of the famous great slugger, the Sultan of SWAT, the Bambino for the New York Yankees. And this is one of his more famous moments, Game 3, 1932 World Series against the Chicago Cubs, in which allegedly he called his shot.
Historic moment from baseball's past.
So these historical moments are essentially challenge modes in which you attempt to duplicate the historical feats of famous players. And so here we've got our goals, which is to hit one home run in a World Series game. No pressure.
And it's really quite clever, actually, because if you just like challenge modes but don't care about the history, you could end up playing the history modes anyway. Like it has a useful function in the game.
There he goes. He's calling his shot. Let's see if I can deliver. So now you'll see here, this is supposedly taking place in 1932. You've got the base hit. Good start.
Video games were in black and white back then. That's what
so I have to do it on the first try. Okay, well, let's try again. The good thing about these challenges is that they can load you back in very fast. So let's try this one more time. But basically, they've got the kind of the gray cinematic look. But then the stadiums and many of the players, the people in the crowd, are from the modern game, and it looks a little goofy. Oh!
Swing and a miss as he was way in front of that one.
Hey, this pitcher better watch himself right here. The way this guy's swinging, he's got a.
Oh, this is tragic. I apologize to people watching this.
It's a great point. Like, if you think, if you're to watch, Ken Burns baseball, for example, or any of this footage, we just saw some footage before this of people in the crowd. But investing the kind of money and person hours into creating that would make, you and me and a few other thousand people in America really happy. But it's in no way, shape, or form a good, business decision. Oh man!
All right, well let's go to a different historical moment, because apparently I'm not up to calling my shot. Yeah. Now, I would say I did mess around with these a bit last night, and I did manage to get a hit as Willie Mays. So
Hey.
it could be worse. Let's go to a more modern one. Let's go to Ken Griffey, who, for those of you who don't know, really beloved, probably the most beloved baseball player in modern baseball history. Played most of his career with the Seattle Mariners, late career with the Cincinnati Reds. And let's go to his first All-Star game, where all we have to do is get a hit.
You know, it's funny. So I was working on what became my book of my dissertation years ago, and I didn't like baseball then, and I kind of tried to educate myself about baseball and learn more about it, and I learned to love it, actually. But Bob, every person I asked our age who likes baseball, like, loves Ken Griffey Jr.
I mean,
And I didn't really understand, because I wasn't living here at the time, and he's just, I know you just said he's beloved. It's crazy. I couldn't get over it. Like, what? Do you all know him personally? People love Ken Griffey Jr.
So a big part of Ken Griffey's appeal has to do with his style of play. So he was hardworking, but when he did something big, he celebrated, and he showed flash, he showed style. He wasn't trying to show anybody up, but he was kind of celebrating his achievements in a way that wasn't really done in previous eras of baseball history. And another thing was that he was the main attraction. He was the namesake for a very famous baseball video game called Ken Griffey Jr.'s Baseball for the Super Nintendo, which came out, I think, in 1994, 1995. And everybody I know had that game. Everybody. Oh, just drop. That's not good. But with Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, it was really neat because Ken Griffey's likeness was really well represented in the game. The player that he was playing as in the game replicated his very famous batting stance. Oh, come on. And it was a really fun game, and it was a really beautiful game for the Super Nintendo. And so that went a long way. I think that game in particular went a long way toward building up Ken Griffey as kind of a beloved baseball player for my generation.
It's the most important pitch in the game, Matty. It puts the hitter on the defensive. I can only think of myself being in the batter's box. When I'm sitting 1-0, I am all over.
So it's funny you mentioned a little bit of a disconnect between a lot of game resources obviously weren't changed in the time period, but for the 1990s that's less jarring, right? Mm-hmm. You know.
So stepping in, Ken Griffey Jr. as he'll look to bring home that tying run from second with a base hit into the outfield. Ready to deliver. Here's the first pitch.
Base hit. Come on. Drop. Drop. No.
That's a big out, number one.
Oh. I'm sorry, Ken. I couldn't get it done.
Couldn't get it done for you, man. I'm sorry.
But I think with baseball, and with this game in particular, I think it's really interesting because you can see not only where the developers have done a bit of work to create these moments and to give gameplay incentives to the player to play them, you know, with the rewards that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, but also, you know, Major League Baseball seems to have played a hand in determining which moments in which players get profiled by this game.
Right.
And I think it's interesting to look here and read this as a text to see which players, which teams they've kind of selected to focus on. And so you've got Griffey, you've got Babe Ruth, most popular player, most famous player, the 2016 Chicago Cubs. So this is kind of a tip of the cap to more recent baseball fans and kind of the more famous recent events in baseball past where the Cubs overcame their 108-year World Series championship drought. Then you've got Willie Mays, another all-time favorite, all-time great player, and then Bryce Harper, who is the cover athlete for this game. Somebody who's very popular with younger fans, but is kind of widely despised by just about everybody else.
And his rookie year in and of itself is not necessarily anything historic. It's just that he's the cover. But you say it's interesting. So there's no, there's no Barry Bonds there.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, right?
Yeah.
But then there are also, I'm trying to think of different kind of figures.
I don't see Mark McGwire. Yeah.
Right.
So anybody tainted by those problems, and I haven't seen also Ty Cobb.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Famous baseball player, perhaps the greatest hitter in baseball history, but also a remarkable racist. And somebody with a really unrepentant, yes. So it is interesting. We got an Ichiro moment here. So we've got a mix of historical players and then kind of more recent players. Let's see.
So it's funny because I think they have got a couple of historical stadiums, I guess. But what I'd love to see in the future, if possible, would be full-on historic teams. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's a larger. So, for example, Out of the Park Baseball does this. Out of the Park Baseball is a management sim where you're a baseball manager. So it's basically a game that is spreadsheets for the most part, but it is very good. It's a very, very good management game. And of course, because they don't have to worry about graphic representations and so on, you can control any roster, any team going back to the mid to late 1800s. Mm-hmm. And it's it's baseball nerd heaven. Do you want to be the 1974 Cincinnati Reds? Here's your chance. Do you want to, see what you can do with the 27 Yankees?
Yeah.
And of course, that's another thing. Like so many sports, baseball has those iconic teams: the 27 Yankees, the mid-70s Reds, the Red Machine, right, and all this kind of stuff.
1927 on this day in baseball history, Ty Cobb recorded 3 hits, one extra base hit against the Detroit Tigers. Interesting.
That is genuinely very, very interesting.
Let's see that's third inning. Let's see second inning if there's anybody. And so you've got, I think, a really good mix here of old and new. And this one goes back to 1912. Then you've got 1995, 1961.
Where's Cap Hansen? That's what I want to know.
I saw mention of Honus Wagner back there, Trevor Hoffman, 2002, Ricky Henderson, Pujols, 2018, Babe Ruth, 1917, Walter Johnson, 1920. And some of these challenges are a little difficult. I mean, win one game, you have to play the whole game as Walter Big Train Johnson. That's quite a bit.
I have to say, this will not be surprising to people watching because I'm an historian. I love this of baseball. I love the fact that baseball fans of all ages know who Honus Wagner was. It's such a, and I think it's such a strength for the sport in so many ways. And it has that longevity that football doesn't have. And the NBA doesn't have. Of course, one day the NBA will have it.
Yes.
But they just don't have it yet.
Yes.
And it's just kind of it's really a fascinating strength. I'm still kind of getting over the fact Ty Cobb's in the game. That's very surprising to me.
All right, here we've got
very surprising to me.
Rogers Hornsby. You know what? I'm kind of interested. Now Rogers Hornsby, he's going to be in black and white. I'm a little bit interested to see if Stan Musial in 1962 is going to be...
Yeah, where's the cutoff?
Yeah, well, this one says modern day Cubs to relive this moment. Let's go ahead and let's do this one. Stan Musial, one of the great players, Hall of Fame player for the St. Louis Cardinals from the late 1940s through the early 1960s. Kind of a great hitter, run scorer, and just all around well-respected player, well-liked player. And I am a bit of a baseball nerd, maybe not as much as most, but I do think you're right. I think also it is in color. I do think it is interesting that, like you said, the many baseball players, even some who don't follow it that closely, have this kind of institutional knowledge of the game's past. And I think, like you said, I don't know many other sports that can say the same thing. I mean, would football in England, would fans of that have that kind of institutional knowledge, or fans of international soccer in general?
Right. Yeah, they do. I mean, I think international soccer really hits its golden age in the 1960s with the great Brazil team that won its third World Cup in 1970. And so, you know, the 1970 Brazil team is considered the best ever soccer team and stuff. And so some people would know about maybe Di Stefano and guys left in the 1950s. Within Britain itself, then they'll know particular famous guys like Stanley Matthews and people like that. I have to say that I think American baseball is a little bit different. And the funny thing about in Britain, everybody knows who Stanley Matthews is, but certainly in Bolton, where he played, they kind of have a close sense of affinity to him. Cities have their own great players that you kind of know about, but you kind of forget about until they get brought up, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, oh, I forgot that Newcastle loves that guy, you know. And baseball's got something more cohesive going on, and I think part of it as well, of course, is that whole, you know, baseball was a Northeastern American sport, and it kind of grew with the country, you know. It kind of, obviously there was a lag. You know, the Los Angeles Angels didn't exist during the gold rush or whatever, obviously. But, you know, half a century later, you know, the Brooklyn Dodgers become the Los Angeles Dodgers, and there's a lot of... But they kind of carry that history with them. And then you have the New York Yankees, who, you know, you either love or you hate the New York Yankees, right? But the great strength of the Yankees is... Like, when they changed stadium a few years ago, it was a big deal, because theoretically they've been there forever. And I think it just feels... There's something more cohesive about the baseball experience.
Yeah.
And I think part of it as well is that, like, if you look at, you know, soccer in the 1800s, you know, the typical formation had 2 defenders and 5 attackers, you know?
Wow.
And games would end 6-4. And baseball fans talk about time a lot, so the game has no clock and things like that. But there's also this timeless sense that there was no such thing as war when Babe Ruth played. But because everything is based on the same basic ideals, which is hits, extra bases, you know, the box score gives you all the info you need.
Yeah.
And they've been keeping box scores since the 1800s. So you can go and calculate Babe Ruth's war, and of course they've done that already. And if they calculate, like, Fangraphs has F war, and if you had a new war, like if I had my brand new awesome metric for measuring just how good people were, I could plug Babe Ruth's numbers into it, and voila, now I can compare Babe Ruth to Mike Trout.
Yep.
Like we were saying earlier, and it's really astonishing. It's a really, you know, when I talk to people, like my wife did not enjoy history classes in college, right? And I talked to this woman at work she works on grants for us, and she didn't enjoy history in college. And what they both say is, well, I like it when, they both say, like, you know, well, I like it when I feel it immediate, when I feel like I can touch it, or I feel connected to it. And I think that baseball kind of has that, despite all the kind of slightly stodgy, old-fashioned, you know, traditional view of baseball. I think there's this immediacy kind of built into it.
Yeah.
You can compare my... Yeah,
exactly.
Sorry,
I mean, you can... you can...
Statistically,
you can bring famous players from the past to the modern day.
Right.
And especially with Mike Trout, for those of you who don't know, very famous center fielder for the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And he is often compared, because of his great play, he's often compared to the best players ever. And those players are consistently brought back up in broadcasts, in articles about the game, articles about Trout, and so it gives the past an extra sense of immediacy that I don't really think you have with definitely other American sports, right? You know, somebody isn't just going to sit there and be like, oh, well, that running back looked just like Bo Jackson there, or, you know, his statistics are similar to Bo Jackson. And then with basketball, that doesn't happen very often, because the rules of basketball have changed so much in the last 2 decades in particular that it's almost like they are playing a different sport in some circumstances. So with baseball, the rules, however, and the statistics haven't really changed since the early 20th century. So I think, just to add to your point, I think it gives it the past a real presence in the present.
But isn't it fascinating? Because so in soccer, for example, the big debate is who, the greatest ever was theoretically Pelé. My personal favorite was Maradona, and Maradona's peak came about 15 to 20 years after Pelé's peak, and the game was different, and there were different styles of players, and and they were on different teams and all these kinds of things. And then in basketball, like Steph Curry. Well, I guess Steph Curry is not actually the best player now, but certainly a year or two ago, Steph Curry was at least top 3 in professional basketball, right? He's a sensational player. Certainly the top scorer, right? And, he couldn't be more different from like a Michael Jordan, or even, I guess, that year of Penny Hardaway being really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so hard to compare them. So I think you're completely right. And what amazes me is, so for example, walks became much more important in baseball in the 2000s when sabermetrics became much more of a big deal, and people started recognizing the ability to walk. This is in the book Moneyball, Michael Lewis has this wonderful phrase he keeps repeating, about Euclid, the Red Sox player. Euclid, the Greek god of walks.
Yeah.
And then if you go back, and it turns out that even in eras where it was all about the big ball and everything else, that some of the greatest that ever played they were getting walks, and they were hard to get out, and all this kind of stuff. And it's absolutely fascinating to me that even when you bring in these new rules, a lot of these top players still do well in them. So it just goes to show there actually is something truth. There's something true to how little the game has changed.
Yeah. I'm going to do a little bit of pitching with my fellow Texan, Nolan Ryan, against the Detroit Tigers.
I was going to say, you got to end with the... Now, this is not the game where he beats the crap out of the guy in the mound, right?
No. That was in the early 90s. This is in the 70s where he's playing for the Angels.
That was old man Nolan Ryan dishing out some justice.
That's right. I've become more and more of a fan of football, soccer in the past decade, and I think that game, or at least from exposure I've had to broadcast and to articles online and then also to podcasts and radio shows, there is a sense of history, but it's usually only for the really great players. Whereas with baseball, I mean, you have historical awareness of even mediocre players going back decades, and it's really strange. And of course, baseball, incredibly popular in many parts of the world. And I'm kind of curious, with your book and history of baseball in Asia and Taiwan in particular, is there that same sort of historical knowledge of past baseball feats that you get with North American baseball?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, and it's kind of interesting because Major League Baseball it's the gold standard across the world for professional baseball, but it's also the most mature and well-formed baseball league, I would argue, and the most commercially successful. Number 2 is definitely Japan, so I think, and the Japanese similarly will celebrate, will celebrate in very similar ways to the United States, despite the fact their fan culture is really different. So, for example, Japanese fans are famous for kind of doing soccer-style fan culture in the stadium, like singing and stuff like that, and all these different things. It's a different experience from an American Major League game. They also, the kind of sabermetric revolution, as it were, I don't think it's as pervasive in Japan as it is here, which is actually kind of funny because Japanese managers who were derided in the 1980s by American managers for being very small ball and very conservative and all that bunting and base running were actually kind of ahead of their time in that sense.
Yeah.
Because present-day baseball has gone way more towards having fast, agile players who can run the bases and get walks and stuff.
Yep.
And that was always the Japanese approach. So, but they do. And so, for example, in Japan, you have a man named Sadaharu Oh, who is, he has the most professional home runs of any player in the world. He's 868 home runs, all of which in the Japanese league. And he played in the 1960s. You have this team called the Yomiuri Giants, who had the exact same uniform as the San Francisco Giants, because they were modeled after the New York Giants. And they had a team in the 60s, they won 9 titles in a row. And they are just, they're like the 27 Yankees, right? They are the legendary super team. And not only did he play for that team, but, you know, he was the best guy on that team, but like not by much, you know? And so these guys are, you know, they have that same style, I think, of legend making that you have in the US. But, you know, to go to your point, to make a really nerdy historian point, the sabermetric evolution is fascinating to me as well, because when I think of the fact that, and I read articles like this all the time, I went back and I found this, you know, second infielder for the Orioles in 1972, and everyone always said he was bad, but look, I can show you actually he was pretty decent, you know. And it makes me think of, like, that's what modern day historians do, you know. It's all like bottom-up sources. Like, I've uncovered this, I re-examined this case, I found a diary by a butcher, and now I can tell you the working class vision of the. And it cracks me up, because it's the exact same thing as what all these fan graphs and analyst guys do.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I often think that there's a potential, I don't know if this is true, but I think there's a potential for a lot of overlap between baseball stat heads and historians. I don't have any, you know, evidence of that. I haven't kept records, but I know quite a few historians who are very into baseball and very into analytics.
And baseball is the sport of choice for older male academics.
Oh yes, oh yes.
But you know, I go to conferences. I go to a conference in Arizona, which is tons of fun, and it's really interesting because there's different styles of how to engage with the sport of baseball. So I'll kind of do my PhD guy doing baseball stuff. Can I talk to you guys about the culture of Japan and how it interacts with baseball and stuff? And they love it, and they're really supportive, and they really like it. And there's people who get up and do similar things in American history. And then there's a guy who gets up and he's like, right, we all know about this famous relationship between this owner and his manager in the 1920s. Let me share some stuff that I've uncovered. And it's the 1920s, so they're all drunk and they're all hitting each other's wives and doing awful, terrible, crazy things the whole time. And it's just a riot of madness, you know? And it's just fun to kind of be around it, because what my experience with kind of the baseball scholarship firmament, you know, community, is that they just love baseball, and they love learning about baseball, and they love talking about baseball. And when it comes to the methods where it's more popular, you know, attempting to be accessible and enjoyable, or whether you're being someone like me who's just like, I'm going to write an article that you guys will read and maybe nobody else, they're completely agnostic when it comes to the approach. They just love history of their the sport.
Yeah.
They love that it's being done. They want more of it, and it's a great vibe to be around. Actually, it's so encouraging and it's so supportive, because they have yet to find a historian they don't want to succeed. You know, it's fantastic.
Well, that's awesome. Well, John, I think that's going to do it for our video today. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for sharing so much about your book.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. It's always fun, and I think you did well. You got a couple of those challenges. I thought that was pretty impressive.
Hey, yeah, the one reason I'm ending this video right now is because I just successfully completed one of these challenges. I'm going to stop, pat myself on the back, and probably never come back to these challenges again. Too difficult, take too much time to get good at. But thank you, audience, for joining us for this episode. If you're interested in learning more about History Respawn, please visit our webpage at www.historyrespawn.com. And if you are interested in supporting the show and our work here, please visit our site on Patreon, which is at www.patreon.com/History Respawn. Until next time, goodbye.